Okay, tonight we're going back to the summer of 1993. The air was thick with heat, cicadas sang above empty roads, and in the small town of Frankfort, New York, a 12-year-old girl pedaled her white and pink bicycle down a quiet stretch of country road. Minutes later, that road fell silent, a silence that would last for decades. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories not just with facts, but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. Here we don't chase horror for shock. We look into the quiet places of the human mind, the places where morality fractures and where empathy fades into obsession. Tonight, we reopen one of upstate New York's most unsettling mysteries, the disappearance of Sarah Ann Wood and the confession that, 30 years later, still refuses to set her spirit free. Frankfort, New York, in the summer of 1993, was a town that believed evil lived elsewhere. Doors stayed unlocked, church bells from St. Mary's marked time, and children rode their bikes through fields of gold. Strangers waved simply because they could. It was a place too small, people thought, for secrets. Among them was 12-year-old Sarah Ann Wood, a girl whose smile softened even the hardest days. Gentle, curious, and full of faith, she sang in the church choir, pressed wildflowers into books, and never forgot to say grace. Her father tended the church grounds. Her mother taught Sunday school. To Frankfort, Sarah was everything good. The child everyone trusted to come home before dinner, the quiet proof that their little town was still safe. No one imagined how quickly that illusion would shatter. Sarah's life moved in a gentle rhythm, school, church, home, a pattern so ordinary it felt eternal. The Woods lived on a quiet street, lined with whispering trees. Her room was filled with drawings of angels and butterflies. She dreamed of becoming an art teacher. It was a simple life, untouched by tragedy, and perhaps that simplicity made it vulnerable. On the morning of August 18, 1993, the sky was clear, the air heavy with heat, cicadas singing their endless hymn. Sarah attended Bible camp at St. Mary's, wearing denim shorts, a white t-shirt with a pink heart, and a silver cross around her neck. When her father offered a ride home, she smiled and said no. She wanted to ride her bike. By 2:30 p.m., a neighbor saw her pedaling uphill. 15 minutes later, her bicycle lay on the roadside, one wheel still turning. Her backpack rested nearby. No footprints, no struggle, only the sound of nothing, a silence so deep it swallowed the day whole. Her father was the first to arrive. He recognized the bicycle instantly. The same handlebars he had adjusted the week before, the same scratches from her clumsy turns on the driveway. But now it was lying like a body itself, still and pale beneath the sun. He shouted her name, his voice swallowed by the trees. When police arrived, they found little more than tire marks that led off into the woods. For Frankfort, a place where nothing ever happened, something unspeakable had just begun. The town changed in a day. The image of Sarah's empty bike made the front page of every newspaper in the region. Volunteers combed the forests with flashlights and prayer. Church bells rang as people knelt on front lawns, whispering for a miracle. The search became an act of faith, and then, slowly, of despair. But while Frankfort mourned, another life moved quietly in the shadows, that of Louis Lent, a man whose existence seemed designed to go unnoticed. Lent lived in Massachusetts, just across state lines. To neighbors, he was unremarkable, a maintenance worker, often solitary, sometimes polite, always distant. He drove a white pickup truck and kept mostly to himself. He had been described as odd but never dangerous, the kind of man people avoided eye contact with out of instinct rather than reason. Lent's childhood had been shaped by isolation and violence. Raised by a strict father and an absent mother, he learned early that control equaled safety. He suffered from untreated depression and an emerging antisocial disorder. There were warning signs: animal cruelty, voyeuristic behavior, obsessive fantasies of dominance. But no one looked close enough. In small towns, people confuse silence with goodness. As an adult, Lent became what psychologists call a functional predator. He maintained routines, held a job, and appeared stable. But beneath that exterior was an unrelenting obsession with power over the defenseless. He collected objects, children's toys, photographs, and maps, not for nostalgia but for control. Each item was a token, a reminder that, in a life where he felt invisible, he could still exert force over someone else's existence. The contrast between Sarah and Lent could not have been sharper. She was life in motion, laughter, faith, movement. He was stillness, repressed, inward, decaying. One represented innocence, the other the hunger to consume it. Yet in the psychology of crime, these two extremes often orbit each other. The innocent, by simply existing, provokes the broken. Lent's pathology fit what Freud once called the repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate early trauma, to impose suffering as a way of mastering one's own pain. In Lent's mind, control became redemption. By abducting, harming, or erasing, he could rewrite the chaos of his own childhood. The act wasn't just violence. It was theology twisted inward, a search for meaning through domination. It was the same sickness seen in many predatory offenders, the transformation of weakness into ritualized power. In Frankfurt, people liked to believe that monsters lived far away. In cities, on the news, in stories whispered to scare children. But that summer revealed a darker truth. Evil doesn't always wear fangs or hide in the night. Sometimes it wears a clean shirt, drives to work, and waves at you from across the street. As philosopher Epictetus once said, men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of things. Frankfurt viewed itself as safe, and so it refused to see. When Sarah vanished, the illusion cracked. Parents began locking doors. Children no longer rode bikes alone. Conversations became shorter, eyes sharper, trust thinner. The disappearance of one child had rearranged an entire town's sense of reality. For Lent, somewhere miles away, that silence was power. It meant he had succeeded in making a world bend toward his invisible hand. For the Wood family, it was a wound that never closed. For Frankfurt, it was the first lesson in how fragile innocence can be when watched by something patient, unseen, and deeply broken. Monsters, after all, don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live next door, quiet, polite, and waiting for the world to let its guard down. And on that quiet summer afternoon in 1993, the world did. The day Sarah Ann Wood disappeared began with nothing unusual, and ended with the unbearable stillness that comes when a story has been cut in half. It was August 18th, 1993. The temperature hovered in the mid-80s, sunlight poured through the trees, and the air felt heavy, like it knew something terrible was about to happen. At 2:15 p.m., Sarah left St. Mary's Church after Bible camp. She was cheerful, waving goodbye to her friends, promising to see them again the next day. Her father had offered her a ride home, but she smiled and said no. The road was familiar, barely 2 miles, and she wanted the independence that every 12-year-old craves, that small illusion of adulthood. At approximately 2:30 p.m., a neighbor driving along the same stretch of road saw her pedaling uphill. The image was ordinary, even peaceful. A girl on her pink and white bicycle, her long braid swinging, a small backpack strapped to her shoulders. It would be the last time anyone saw Sarah alive. 15 minutes later, at 2:45 p.m., a passing motorist noticed something strange by the side of the road. A bicycle lay on its side, its front wheel spinning idly in the wind. The driver slowed, hesitated, then continued. They assumed the owner had gone into the woods for a moment. In small towns, danger rarely fits the script. When Sarah's father arrived home around 3:30 and found the house empty, he thought she might still be at church. He drove back, checked the playground, the parking lot, the nearby trail. Nothing. Then, rounding the bend on Miller Road, Robert Wood saw it. His daughter's bicycle lying in the grass, one wheel still spinning. Her backpack was open, her water bottle on its side. No Sarah, no sound. He called her name again and again, his voice echoing into the trees. The cicadas had gone silent. The forest seemed to hold its breath. When police arrived minutes later, they treated it as a missing child case, not yet a crime. But as flashlights cut through the underbrush and officers read the ground, the story shifted. Faint tire tracks curved off the road and disappeared into the woods. No footprints, no drag marks, no broken branches. It was as if Sarah had been lifted out of the world. Investigators later said the scene showed speed and precision. the mark of someone who knew what he was doing. By nightfall, the search had become the largest in Herkimer County's history. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forest in lines, their flashlights swaying through the trees. Helicopters swept the sky. Dogs followed faint trails that vanished near water. Every few minutes, someone called her name. The only answer was silence. The next morning, searchers found a scrap of pink fabric snagged on a low branch about a mile from where her bike had fallen. It matched the shirt Sarah had been wearing. Later, one of her sneakers turned up half buried in mud near a stream. Each clue sparked a brief, painful hope. Proof that she had been there, and proof that she was gone. Then came the witness accounts. A woman driving along Route 67 around 2:30 p.m. remembered a white pickup truck parked oddly on the roadside, facing the wrong direction. The driver, heavy-set, bearded, in his 40s, stared at her as she passed. Minutes later, a postal worker saw what looked like the same truck speeding away from Miller Road. Police chased every lead, but in 1993 there were no cameras, no databases, no digital trails. They interviewed hundreds of people and checked dozens of vehicles, but nothing matched. As days turned to weeks, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. The media flooded Frankfort, turning quiet streets into satellite lots. Rumors spread faster than facts. Psychics claimed visions. Strangers mailed letters claiming to know where Sarah was buried. None led anywhere. The Wood family prayed through it all, clinging to faith as their only constant. 2 months later, a break came from Massachusetts. A man named Louis Lent was arrested for attempting to abduct another young girl. She survived by jumping from his moving truck. The vehicle, a white pickup with a dented fender, caught investigators' attention. When questioned, Lent denied ever being in New York. But his work history told otherwise. He'd been traveling across upstate New York that summer for maintenance jobs. Detectives secured a warrant and searched his apartment. Inside, they found what turned suspicion into horror. In a cardboard box were neatly folded children's clothes. Beneath his bed lay a notebook, a log filled with dates, locations, and cryptic notes. The one from New York, woods by the road. In the basement, investigators found maps marked with red dots, one pinned directly over Frankfort. A drawer contained small trinkets, a ribbon, a charm bracelet, a heart-shaped keychain. Forensics later tied some to missing children across nearby states. When detectives confronted him, Lent sat quietly. He didn't deny or confess, he only said, "You won't find her." Those words were both admission and warning. He had planned everything, not only the act, but the disappearance itself. Behavioral analysts would later describe his method as organized predation. He watched, waited, and struck with precision. His crimes were not impulsive. They were calculated rituals of control. By the time his name reached the public, the damage was beyond repair. Sarah's body was never found. The fragments, the bike, the shoe, the notes, told only a partial truth. The rest was buried somewhere in the quiet. Frankfort never fully recovered. People learned that evil doesn't come with warning. It parks by the roadside and watches. Even now, when the wind drifts through the trees along Miller Road, the silence remains, heavy, watchful, unchanged since that August afternoon. It seeps into the soil, hums beneath the cicadas, and clings to the shadows. Because some silences never fade. They echo endlessly, reminding us that the truth was always screaming. When police first brought Louis Lent into custody, he looked unremarkable. A quiet, heavy-set man with tired eyes and a mechanic's hands. He didn't seem like a monster. He seemed like a man no one would remember, and that, perhaps, was what made him dangerous. The interrogation began in the early hours of the morning. Investigators from New York joined Massachusetts police in a small, windowless room. For hours, Lent denied everything. Denied being in Frankfort, denied knowing Sarah Wood, denied the meaning of the notebook found in his home. He spoke softly, almost politely, as if the entire situation were a misunderstanding. Detective Mike Vaughan later described the moment that changed the room. When presented with a photograph of Sarah smiling, holding a puppy, Lent's expression faltered. For a brief second, he looked away, his jaw tightening. Then he said quietly, "She was a good kid." It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't innocence either. For 2 days, the questioning continued. Investigators showed him maps, timelines, witness statements. Each time Lent deflected, sometimes smiling faintly as though amused by their persistence. Then, late on the second night, he leaned back in his chair and said almost conversationally, "You'll never find her. The forest keeps its secrets." The words hit the room like a gust of cold air. The silence afterward was suffocating. Detectives understood what he meant, that somewhere deep in the endless expanse of woods across upstate New York lay the truth they would never reach. A week later, under mounting evidence and pressure, Lent finally confessed, though confessed may be too generous a word. He recounted events in fragments, mixing truth with manipulation. He admitted to abducting Sarah from Miller Road, luring her into his truck under the pretense of needing directions. He spoke of how calm she was, how she trusted him, how it all happened so quickly. When asked where he took her, his tone changed. He described driving north through back roads into forested areas near Adirondack Park. Then he stopped. "I don't remember the exact spot," he said. "It's better that way." Investigators spent months following his vague descriptions: a dirt road, a stream nearby, a tree shaped like a cross. Search teams combed through thousands of acres, digging where the ground seemed disturbed, tracing maps that led nowhere. Every effort ended in failure. Lent's words proved true. The forest kept its secrets. When the confession became public, it ignited a nationwide storm. Newspapers printed Lent's face on front pages from New York to California. Talk shows debated how a man like him could live undetected for years. Parents saw his eyes on their television screens and began checking the locks twice at night. For Frankfort, the media frenzy felt like both attention and invasion. News vans lined the small town's main street. Reporters stood in front of the church and the post office, broadcasting grief to millions. Some residents refused to speak to journalists, calling them vultures. Others shared their memories of Sarah, desperate to keep her human amid the noise of headlines. Schools implemented new safety rules. Children no longer walked home alone. Buddy systems became mandatory. Strangers were suddenly suspects. The town that once prided itself on knowing everyone now lived under the uneasy truth that evil had walked among them unnoticed. At night, porch lights glowed longer than usual. Parents tucked their children in with trembling hands. The woods, once a place for picnics and fishing, became a boundary, a shadowed presence at the edge of every backyard. Rumors spread of sightings, of confessions, of buried clues. Every knock on the door carried a pulse of fear. For Sarah's family, the world had narrowed to two unbearable facts. Their daughter was gone, and the man who took her refused to give her back. Her father, Robert Wood, appeared on television pleading directly to Lent. "Please, just tell us where she is. We need to bring her home." Lent never responded. Meanwhile, psychologists and criminologists tried to understand Lent's mind. They described him as a controlled predator, methodical, emotionless, driven not by rage, but by ritual. He had no clear pattern in his victims' ages or appearances. What united them was vulnerability. To Lent, control itself was the goal, the act of deciding when a life would vanish. The trial was short but devastating. Lent was convicted for the murder of other victims and sentenced to life without parole. Though evidence strongly tied him to Sarah Wood's disappearance, the lack of a body meant no official closure. For the Wood family, justice was partial, like a prayer cut off mid-sentence. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Lent was led away in chains. Someone shouted, "Where's Sarah?" He didn't look back. In Frankfort, the case became more than a tragedy. It became a dividing line in time. People spoke of life before Sarah and after Sarah. Businesses closed earlier. Teenagers stopped hanging out near the woods. Even the summer air felt heavier, as if carrying the memory of something it wished to forget. Weeks after the trial, St. Mary's Church organized a candlelight vigil. Hundreds gathered under the soft hum of streetlights. Children clutched candles that flickered in the wind. Parents held each other and wept. The pastor spoke gently, reminding everyone that faith endures even in silence. When the prayers ended, the crowd walked together down Miller Road, the same path Sarah had taken on her bicycle that August afternoon. They stopped at the spot where her bike was found. Someone had placed a wooden cross there, wrapped in pink ribbons and wildflowers. As the night deepened, The flames of hundreds of candles reflected off the chrome of the old guardrail. The forest loomed quietly beyond, vast and dark, holding its secrets. In that glow, fragile, trembling Frankfort said goodbye to its innocence. That summer, the town learned a cruel truth. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wave to you from across the street, and when they finally leave, the silence they leave behind never really ends. To understand Louis Lent, one must first understand control. His crimes were never acts of chaos. They were rituals of domination. Every decision he made, from the way he chose his victims to the way he hid their remains, reflected an obsessive need to dictate the boundaries of another person's existence. In Lent's world, control was not just power, it was identity. Psychologists who studied his behavior later described him as a paradox, outwardly unremarkable, inwardly consumed by a compulsive hunger to assert dominance. He lived a quiet, methodical life, a maintenance worker, a man with routines, someone the world would overlook. But beneath that monotony was a restless void, one that demanded to be filled by fear. For Lent, inflicting suffering became a way to prove he still existed. There is a theory in psychology known as instrumental cruelty, harm not born from emotion, but from purpose. Lent's violence was detached, strategic. He didn't seek pleasure in pain itself. He sought the quiet afterward, the frozen silence when the victim's will was extinguished. In that void, he felt something close to peace. Investigators who spent years reviewing his interviews noted how often he returned to the idea of silence. He spoke of moments when everything just stopped. For most people, silence brings calm. For Lent, it was conquest, the sound of control achieved. In this way, his psyche mirrors that of many organized offenders, intelligent enough to manipulate, broken enough to mistake control for meaning. When the court declared him guilty, Lent showed no remorse. He stared straight ahead, blinking occasionally, as though watching a play in which he was both actor and spectator. Even when he confessed to other crimes later, a boy in Pittsfield, a girl in Vermont, he spoke in the same measured tone, careful not to reveal too much. His words were a weapon, his silence an even sharper one. Behind bars, he became almost monk-like. He read the Bible not out of faith but fascination. "There's power in forgiveness," he once told a prison chaplain, "especially when you don't ask for it." That sentence captures the chilling logic of his mind, forgiveness as another form of control. To refuse remorse was, to him, to remain in command. Lent's fascination with silence reveals something larger about the human condition, our fear of insignificance. In philosophy, the Stoics taught that power over oneself is the highest virtue. Lent perverted that idea. He sought power not over himself, but over others' existence. His actions became a grotesque imitation of Stoic calm, the stillness of a predator mistaken for enlightenment. From a Freudian lens, Lent's control fixation may stem from early trauma, a childhood marked by isolation, humiliation, and suppressed rage. His compulsion to dominate was an attempt to reclaim the agency stripped from him as a boy. Each victim became a vessel for his unresolved past, an echo of the helplessness he once felt. Yet by reenacting that power imbalance, he only deepened his void, ensuring that peace would always remain unreachable. Meanwhile, the Wood family lived in a silence of their own, one not of control, but of grief. Sarah's room remained untouched for years. Her bed was still made. Her favorite book, Charlotte's Web, lay on the nightstand, its pages yellowing under the sun. Her mother kept the window slightly open, believing perhaps that one day Sarah would return and need the air to breathe. The house became a museum of memory. Every object whispered her absence. A music box that no longer played, a school ribbon faded to pale pink, the indentation of small shoes on the carpet. For her parents, these relics were unbearable and necessary, the only proof that she had once been real. Yet from this devastation, something remarkable emerged. The Wood family channeled their grief into purpose, founding the Sarah Ann Wood Rescue Center, an organization dedicated to finding missing children and supporting their families. What began as one family's desperate plea became a nationwide network that has helped recover hundreds of children. In this way, Sarah's story transformed from tragedy into a form of redemption, her name turning pain into action, silence into voice. But for Lent, silence remained his chosen language. Over the years he has confessed to multiple killings, yet each time he withholds crucial details, a location, a date, a name. It is his final game, his last dominion. The FBI believes there are more victims buried across New England, but without his cooperation they remain lost to the woods, swallowed by time. This behavior fits what criminologists call residual control. Even when physically restrained, offenders maintain psychological dominance by deciding what truths they will release. Lent's refusal to disclose where Sarah's body lies keeps him powerful, not in the world's eyes but in his own. He dictates what others may know, ensuring that he is never entirely forgotten. In Buddhist thought, suffering persists when one clings to illusion, the illusion of control, of permanence. Lent's tragedy is that his illusion became his only reality. He mistook domination for transcendence, silence for peace, and in doing so, ensured that neither he nor his victims would ever be free. For the Wood family, closure may never come. Yet in every candlelit vigil, every search mission, every parent who hugs their child a little tighter because of Sarah's story, there is resistance against Lent's silence. Her legacy has become a quiet defiance, proving that compassion too can echo louder than cruelty. Today, Louis Lent remains in a maximum security cell, serving life without parole. Age has dulled his movements, but not his control. He speaks little, eats methodically, and spends hours staring at blank walls, as if conversing with the silence he once commanded. His crimes no longer wound through violence but through absence, through the questions that remain unanswered. Even caged, his shadow persists in every unsolved memory of that summer. Because even behind bars, he still holds power, the quiet, enduring power of silence. Every August, the bells of St. Mary's Church ring through the still air of Frankfort. The sound drifts over the same hills and trees that once hid the truth, echoing softly down Miller Road, the path where Sarah's bicycle fell silent. People still gather there, holding candles, whispering prayers into the dusk. Time has aged their faces, but the ache remains the same. Her bicycle never made it home, but her story still rides through the hearts of those who remember. For the people of Frankfort, Sarah is not only a memory, she is a reminder of how fragile innocence can be and how grief can become grace. Because sometimes fear is not the monster in the woods, it is the reflection staring back at us, the one that asks how far we've drifted from empathy and how easily silence becomes complicity. If this story moved you, remember to like, share the video, and subscribe for more. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.